Hello YouTube, it's been a while since my last upload, so in this one I'm going to talk about why I did the modifications I did. If you want a quick overview of everything I changed, that's another video on my channel, check it out. But in this one, let's go into detail on the why. So why would I change a dual sport to a 19-inch front wheel with a 17 by 4 1/4 rear wheel? Well, partly because it came with supermoto wheels and the front 17-inch was damaged, so I had to replace it. So I did get a chance to run the 17 for a while and see what I thought. I thought it was twitchy, I thought it was nervous, I thought when you hit bumps it would make the front end unstable, and I thought it looked dumb, quite frankly. It's too small of a wheel for a big bike like the DR650. So I went to the 19-inch, and it's almost as wide of a tire. A supermoto tire would be a 120. With the 19-inch wheel, you run a 110. So I don't think you're really giving up much in terms of the performance, but you're getting a little more stability from the front end, and you're not lowering the front as aggressively as you do with the 19 versus the 17. And compared to the 21, it puts the geometry of the bike in the sweet spot. So the 17-inch rakes the front end too far forward and makes it nervous. The stock 21 is lazy. The 19 is just right. When you've got this bike leaned over in a turn, you need just the lightest pressure on the handlebars to hold your line. You could probably let go and the bike would almost stay exactly where you have it. So I think that's perfect for a street bike. And if you do want to do off-road, you can still run a 50/50 semi-knobby tire and have a scrambler setup. But I'm happy to run more of a street-oriented setup. The next change would be the muffler. The stock muffler's fine. A lot of people, they hate on it because of how heavy it is, how quiet it is. I actually like that about it. It'll last forever. You can drop the bike and you're not going to dent it. You never have to repack it. The performance really isn't that bad. The main limitation on this bike is the air box and the carburetor, not the muffler. So if you like a quiet bike, go ahead and run the stock muffler. If you want a quiet bike that performs better, then this GSXR muffler is the way to go. It definitely adds a little bit more oomph. When you roll on the throttle, it actually feels eager to rev, whereas with the stock muffler, it feels a little bit restricted. It's hard to explain a change like this because we're talking maybe 1 or 2 horsepower, but it's more of a feeling of the engine wanting to rev. It almost feels like it has a lighter flywheel when it can breathe better. And weight difference is, I think I weighed it around 7 pounds difference with the mid pipe and everything. So that's not a big change, but all that weight is up high. So it's actually a little more than you would think just based on where the weight is on the bike. But the main thing is it looks better, it sounds better, and it's pretty much unobtainium at this point. Good luck finding one of these. So it's just kind of a cool thing to have if you like DR650s. The other alternative would be to run a Leo Vince, but they're almost 500 bucks. I was able to do this whole muffler and mid-pipe for under 150. So if you can score a good deal on a muffler, definitely do what I did and make your own mid-pipe or get somebody who can do it for you for beer money, because if you're going to hire a professional, then you might as well just buy the Leo Vince. All right, so moving on to the next change that's worth talking about would be the carburetor. I run the Keihin FCR 41. That is a pumper carb, which means when you twist the throttle, it squirts fuel. It's also a flat slide carburetor, which means there's no diaphragm connected to a slide plate. The stock carb doesn't actually control the fuel when you twist the throttle. What it does is it controls the airflow by moving a butterfly, and then the airflow changes the pressure, and that causes the vacuum diaphragm to go up or down. Now, what that means is when you twist the throttle, there's always a delay, because first the butterfly moves, then the air pressure changes, then the slide reacts. On a mechanical carb like this Keihin, when you turn the throttle, that slide is moving and the accelerator pump is squirting in fuel. So that's why you get the instant response and the snap when you put in this kind of carburetor versus the stock one. The other thing it does is it runs so much smoother. The stock carburetor thumps up and down with the vacuum changes going through the engine. And those are the most obvious at low speeds because the cylinder is moving up and down at a lower rate. Whereas at high speeds, the cylinder is going up and down, say 4,000 or 5,000 times per minute. Whereas at low speeds, it might be 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 times per minute. That's a big change in how the carburetor operates. None of that applies to a flat slide carburetor because the slide is always where your throttle is holding it. So that makes a big difference in the low speed smoothness, and it gets rid of one of my biggest complaints with these bikes is that vibration and kind of chugging, thumping feeling. This carburetor fixes all that, and it gives you more power, and it makes the engine respond instantly. So if you want to do a wheelie, all you have to do is just rip the throttle really quick, and if you're in first or second gear, it'll come right up. You don't even need to bounce it. Just pure power will lift the front end. So the carbs are not cheap. They're around 500 bucks, but compared to the cost of a motorcycle, I think that's a pretty small upgrade in terms of cost for what you get. Moving on to the front end of the bike, small changes but significant. So the front fender is a DRZ400 supermoto fender. I didn't just change it for the look, I changed it for the performance as well. The stock fender has a flat shovel shape. This one is a little bit shorter and more profiled. That makes it a lot stiffer, and it makes it cut through the wind a lot better. The stock fender flops around and actually causes the handlebars to wobble a bit at high speed. This thing is stable. And when you're going 100 miles an hour, I mean, that's a big difference, right? So I recommend this fender versus the aftermarket ones, which pretty much spray mud and water all over you. This thing actually works. It looks good. It fits the bike with no modification. They're not cheap, but if you can find a used one like I did from a wrecked bike, then it's actually not that much more than buying a universal bolt-on fender. Another thing this bike has is the fork brace. I don't remember the exact brand. I think it might be an RSW. They do make a difference. When you have forks this long, there is a bit of flex and wobble, and this takes care of that. Another change since the last video was this little windshield. For 20 bucks, this thing is worth its weight in gold. It's so good that I would recommend spending the full $100 and getting a real one made by Puig. This is one of the Amazon Chinese knockoffs. It's not made very well, but with enough Loctite and a few other modifications, it's holding together and it works fine. But I would recommend getting the real thing because the last thing you want is your windshield to come apart while you're going down the freeway. So I bought it more of a test and it's holding up fine. If it breaks, then I'm definitely buying the real thing because once you've gotten that little bit of wind off your chest and seen the difference that makes, you'll want to run with one of these on your bikes as well. I used to run a full-size windshield on a previous DR, and I did not like that at all. It made my helmet really noisy, created a lot of buffeting, so these little ones actually work better in my opinion. Another thing you'll want to do on any DR is change the handlebars. The stock ones are heavy and they're also weak, whereas these aluminum fat bars are 1 1/8 inch rather than 7/8, which makes them a lot stiffer, but they're also lighter. And importantly, you can pick the handlebar that fits you. So this is a Wyndham RM bend. If I could do it again, I'd probably buy the CR High just to get a little more rise. But these feel a lot like a factory bike, like if you were to ride a V-Strom or a GS1200, it feels pretty much the same as that. Also, double take mirrors, these are questionable. They came with the bike. They're probably a little expensive for what they are, but they do give you a great view and they're well made. And if anything ever breaks, you can get parts, so not a bad investment. I don't know if you'll be able to see based on the lighting, but tucked up under the cowl I have a Deltran USB, And I prefer that versus all the generic ones you find on Amazon, because this thing is actually well made and will probably last years and years and years, whereas all the generic ones I bought pretty much rattled apart within the first 6 months. So I wired that into the same circuit that powers the Vision handguard lights, and that's the unused power connector behind the cowl that all DR650s have. So I'm able to run all of that off that circuit without any issue, and that means it's switched by the key. And speaking of which, I will flip that on so you can see how the lights work. As you can see, those little 5-watt LEDs throw out a ton of light and probably help keep cagers from running me over. And the police have not given me any troubles over it, so I like these a lot. And they might even help at night. I don't know, I don't ride at night for safety reasons. All right, moving on to things that make life better. The large Acerbis gas tank, I should say Acerbis, 5.3 gallons, and with this carburetor that gives me an easy 220 miles before I need to find gas. Seat concept seat. I used to have a Sargent seat, which has a really nice shape and a really nice foam, but the Sargent is really slippery, whereas you can see this has a textured surface. So from that alone, I would buy a Seat Concepts over a Sargent, because every time you hit the throttle on the Sargent, your butt's sliding back. Not with this. The other thing on the Sargent I didn't like is they have a piping along the edge, and that digs into your legs, or at least it did for me, whereas the Seat Concept, that's not a problem. With any seat, if you put a sheepskin on it, they become all day comfortable, except for the stock seat. That thing is terrible no matter what you do. I don't know how people use it. All right, moving to the back here. The OEM rack with a cheap MOLLE bag, like a military style MOLLE pouch. And I'll lift it up so you can see how this works. You just use those straps, go underneath, and they snap in place. And then I also added a zip tie for a little extra security, but the snaps seem to do fine. So that gives you a simple little day pack for whatever you might need. Couple bucks and there you go. So that was a nice little change. I recommend that if you have an OEM rack. And the DRZ taillight, that's pretty much a must-have upgrade. The stock taillight looks terrible. And then I also run an LED bulb inside here, so I'll flip that on again so you can check this out. It's a good amount of light, as you can see. I think the only reason they don't use these in the United States is because they don't have a reflector built in, whereas the stock taillight does. And since I try to comply with the law for the most part, I just added some reflective strip down here. So I don't need a fix-it ticket over something as stupid as that. Here's another small but meaningful change I recommend to everybody. Get rid of the stock mounts, which are about 2 inches taller and rubber mounted, and go with these low mounts. And then you adjust the threaded rod on the brake, and then on the shifter side you just change the spline position, and everything lines up perfectly. It feels like it was made to be like this. It opens up your rider triangle a little bit so your knees are more comfortable, and just getting rid of that squishy rubber mount makes a huge difference. So these are absolutely a must-have in my opinion, along with the seat. As you can see, I'm using an FMF powerbomb header. This is about a 1/4 inch larger diameter than the stock header. It looks a lot better, and the bomb part I think is actually what's called a reversion chamber. So what that does is it changes the timing of the exhaust pulse when it reflects back towards the cylinder head. And apparently what that does is it spreads out your mid-range a little bit, because every engine has a certain frequency where the exhaust actually helps pull fresh charge into the cylinder, and that's called scavenging. So what this reversion chamber does is it reduces how much scavenging you get, but it spreads it out over a wider range of where it helps. So a perfectly tuned system, you would want to have the scavenging happen at peak power, and you would want to run your engine at peak power. But for a street machine where you're riding at all kinds of different speeds, it makes more sense to have the benefit spread out through the mid-range. I don't even know if the stock system is optimized for scavenging, and perhaps this one isn't either, but I can just tell you from experience, it does seem to be more free revving in the upper RPM range than a stock bike. A standard DR650 pretty much falls off a cliff after about 6,000 RPM, whereas mine, with the full exhaust system, this header, and the carb, it feels like it wants to pull all the way to redline, and it's definitely making peak power a little bit before redline, not like other bikes where peak power is always at redline. So you probably are still a little bit biased towards the mid-range, but compared to a totally stock bike that's corked up, this thing makes a lot more upper end power and has no problem pulling past 100 miles an hour. Not that I would know anything about that. Here's another change that I usually forget to mention. These Warp 9 3-finger levers, I have the clutch and the matching brake. I think they feel great, but as you can see, they're also adjustable with that threaded nut, so you can put them exactly where you like them. And they clear your hand guards, unlike the stock ones. So that's probably the main reason to buy these, is so you don't have to run them underneath the brace on the guard, which means they're just going to hit the ground if you go down. These actually tuck in, so if you have a full coverage hand guard, that will take the hit and not your levers. Plus they look cool. Finally, the 320 millimeter, I think this is an EBC brand brake rotor. And you can see that in order to run this, they include a bracket that relocates where the caliper mounts in relation to the rotor. I think the stock brakes are okay. With the 320, they're just like a modern bike. The only thing I would recommend, which I haven't done myself, is to change out the rubber line for a braided line, and then I think you have all the braking power you could ever want for a DR650. And for the last part here, I'll stop talking and I'll just do a slow beauty shot. Not bad for a pig, right?